Today we're going to talk about all the different cells that we find within the nervous system. So before we do that, let's just have a quick review of the nervous system. So firstly, it's split into two parts: the central nervous system, which is made up of your brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is just everything else bringing information from your receptors towards your central nervous system, and then the neurons that bring information from your nervous system towards your muscles so that you can actually act in response to that stimulus. Let's just get down some basic terminology. So when we're talking about clusters of cell bodies, also known as soma, if they're found within the central nervous system, we refer to them as nuclei. But if they're found within the peripheral nervous system, they are called ganglia. And then the same thing applies when we're talking about the bundle of axons. So in the central nervous system, like for example in your brain, they'd be called tracts. But the same structure of just a bundle of axons, if it's in your peripheral nervous system, are referred to as nerves. So it's important to know that this is based on, like this terminology is based on their location and not actually what they are a part of. So for example, if we're talking about efferent neurons or motor neurons, they are technically part of the peripheral nervous system, right? But since their cell bodies or their soma are found within the spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system, when we are talking about that cluster of cell bodies, we don't actually call them ganglia, we call them nuclei. So it's based on location, not what they actually belong to. For cell type, we'll look at our neurons. So remember in physiology that we're always trying to relate the structure to its function. So we see a vast variety in the different shapes that neurons come in, and we can generally relate that to where it is found and what it's doing within the nervous system. So if you look at the central nervous system, you'd find highly branched multipolar neurons, which makes sense because within your brain, like each neuron makes hundreds or thousands of connections with other neurons. But then if you look at the same type of neuron, multipolar, within the peripheral nervous system, specifically the motor or efferent branch, you'd find they're also multipolar, but they have much less branches. They also have much longer axons compared to those you'd find in the central nervous system. That's because they're making less connections with other neurons like you'd have in the central nervous system. In fact, you can get from the central nervous system to an effector, say muscle fiber or something, just by like one or two of these efferent or motor neurons. So this different shape is related to their function, right? And then in the central nervous system, we also have anaxonic neurons, which are pretty much just dendrites around the cell body, but it doesn't seem to have an axon. It's kind of like the odd one out. Within the peripheral nervous system, right, so there's the sensory or afferent. I always think of afferent as like going towards the central nervous system, so it's like, I'm coming, and then efferent is leaving, so it's like E for exit or something. But anyways, so within the peripheral nervous system, the sensory neurons, you see like they seem to be very divided, where they are receiving the information on one side, where you have the dendrites up here, and then after that you have the terminal boutons on the other edge, where they'd be sending that information to the central nervous system. Two types of neurons you would normally find in the sensory branch are bipolar and pseudo unipolar. So these bipolar, obviously they have two poles, but these pseudo unipolar, it might seem like it has two poles, but really it's one. But it's just fake two poles. That's why it's called pseudo, because pseudo means fake neurons. So glial cells are usually thought of as like the support crew of the neurons, helping them out, bringing them nourishments that they need, and so on. But recent research actually shows like they're really important in things like learning. But we're just going to talk more about their basic functions in this video. So in the peripheral nervous system, we have Schwann cells. So there's two different types that we'll be talking about. The myelinating Schwann cells, which form these myelin sheets around the axons of the motor and sensory neurons. So pretty much they like just bundle up around these axons and form layers and layers of membrane which help provide the insulation needed to make the sending a signal down the axon a lot faster. And then after that, you have the satellite Schwann cells, which don't form myelin sheaths, and instead they help nourish the cell bodies or the soma. So actually, when I first learned about like myelin sheaths, I thought myelin was just like this general material that covered axons, but they're actually living cells, which is kind of creepy because they're like these little cells like hugging onto your nerves, but they're really cool too. And then when you look at the central nervous system, you get a much larger variety of glial cells. So there's oligodendrocytes, which are pretty much the same thing as these myelinating Schwann cells, except they can myelinate like one single cell can myelinate many points on the same axon of one neuron. It can also myelinate parts of one axon and then parts of another axon on a different neuron. Then there's also the microglia, which are pretty much like the immune system in your brain. So they kind of just sit there and they have all these extensions that kind of like sense around their environment. And then if they detect some sort of pathogen or debris or anything that you wouldn't want in your brain, they would migrate to that site of damage and they would just eat it up and like phagocytosis and like degrade it with all their enzymes. They're pretty cool. I like microglia. Microglia. And then there's also the ependymal cells, which line all the cavities within your brain. And these are really important because they secrete cerebrospinal fluid, which is very important when you want to protect the brain. There's also astrocytes, which have a lot of functions. So one of their main ones would be controlling the blood-brain barrier. They bring that connection from the blood vessels to the actual neurons. So they bring in all the nutrients such as oxygen and glucose and stuff that you would get from the blood, and they bring that to the neurons, so they help in nourishing them. Astrocytes are also important in maintaining the microenvironment around the neurons, so the extracellular environment. We want to keep that at a certain homeostasis to make it ideal for these neurons to be able to communicate properly and so on.